Game Schooler Podcast is a weekly audio show that educates new and experienced gamers about the awesomeness of tabletop gaming. In this week's episode, we'll cover Dabba Walla, our game of the week, chat with Keith Matejka from Thunderworks Games in the School of Gaming, and wrap it up by revealing our high five games to play at a con. Welcome to the Game Schooler Podcast. I'm your host, Doug Kotecki, along with my co-host, the esteemed Dr. Michael McCabe. How's it going, Michael?
What's happening, Doug? How are you?
I am pretty darn good, and I'm excited about today's episode. I feel like we got a nice, well-rounded episode of some various different topics, a unique game to talk about, an interview. We haven't done one of those in a while, and a pretty cool high five list that I think is going to be unique and beneficial to our listeners.
Yeah, there's a ton to talk about. We've been playing a ton of games. Excited to share some of the games that we saw from demos a few weeks ago that we're now actually playing full games all the way through. Today's is one example of that. So yeah, there's a lot to discuss.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're going to be talking about is, you heard me say at the top of the show, we're going to be talking to Keith Matejka from Thunderworks Games. And for those of you that don't know, that name may sound familiar to you because we have covered a couple of their games on the show before. We talked about Cape May on episode 117. That's kind of a Monopoly real estate style game, but way better than Monopoly.
So much better.
And 10 Penny Parks, we talked about in episode 69, which is a cool game about building an amusement park in the, 1950s, 60s, and that era.
Around there. Before we were alive.
And the big one that we haven't talked about yet, and we probably will be talking about it in the future in greater detail, which is Role Player. That's kind of the big game that put Thunderworks on the map, and it's a game entirely designed around the concept of building your character for a role player game by drafting dice and adding equipment, and just a really cool game that I've enjoyed. And you haven't had any color issues with that game, have you?
None.
Yeah.
No, I can't. And once in a while I will, but people will just tell me where the dice slide into. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah, nice big chunky dice. A lot of the colors are, no. I could go on and on for that, but I'll answer that question succinctly.
So anything else about Role Player that you want to highlight?
Oh, it's a great game. I think we've been discussing if it's game of the week, and we really need to run that through our lens. So I don't want to say too much about it. And I'm going to be running through Role Player Adventures with two of my kids. So it's one that I know I'm going to talk about ad nauseum for the next dozen episodes or so, and you and I are fresh out of a Role Player adventure, which I know we're going to talk more about here. So, no, I think I can hold. We're going to hear and discuss a lot of all things Ulos, Thunderworks, and Role Player.
If you've played Sagrada in the past and it's a game that you like, this would probably be that next level up. So if you love a fantasy theme and you love some of the mechanisms of Sagrada and placing and drafting dice, this would be a good upgrade to you.
Yeah, and I'll take it a different way to some. If we have new listeners or listeners that are coming in from a video game world, like if you've ever played Madden or NBA 2K where you're building out a character and you're really if you've put 3 or 4 hours into building a single tight end or the perfect power forward, then Role Player Adventures, that is a great little entry, and then you get into it, and the mechanics of the decisions of where am I going to put this die are just outstanding. And which quality do I want to try to level up? Am I going with my strength here? It's a cool game.
Based on my attributes, I have to be a 5'10" point guard that can light it up from behind the 3-point line, because driving to the lane, I am going to get stuffed.
Yeah, you're in trouble there. You better put your intelligence all the way up at 100 if you want to have a chance there.
Yeah, Mr. Designing power forwards. That was never in my cards.
Okay. Well, Doug, it was a video game, so I could take 6'2" and turn that into 6'7", no problem.
No, okay? I got to keep it realistic.
No.
So, do you have anything specific you want to talk about? I know we got a full show, so I kind of want to keep things moving.
You want to keep moving? Yeah, I've got two things for what's awesome with gaming. And one, I just want to close the loop on Dead Reckoning. I've talked about it on and off, but I kind of put that package away. And a quick shout out to friend Dan Cunningham, who designs inserts for Thunderworks. But Dan was also very, very helpful in helping me when I had rules questions in Dead Reckoning. It's always nice to have that phone a friend. But I just have three things I want to talk about. One, it's awesome. Two, there's a ton of content, and don't always be scared from content. Almost want to give our listeners permission that it's okay to just, take a month or two for a game that you have. And then the third is a 30-page rule book isn't always bad. You and I will kind of crack a game if it has a rule book that's this thick, but I found myself appreciating the explanations the more that I played the game, especially playing the game solo. So I wrapped up a mini campaign, just 2 of a 6-game campaign, and put it away and thought, I want to come back to this either with myself or with other people, but for 2024, I'm okay right now. And it was a fun little pirate adventure designed by John DeClaire and published by AEG Games. So that was the one of the 2 parts of awesome.
Awesome. Yeah, and as far as the rule books are concerned, it's the longer that I'm in the hobby is how big of a difference that makes. And sometimes you can read a 30-page rule book and get through it super fast because it's laid out well and it's presenting it in a way that's cohesive as you go through it. And other times you can read a 1.5-page rule book and be completely in the dark and confused on how the game works. So it is a skill within itself, and probably something we should pencil into the School of Gaming at some point as an area of the hobby that is probably one of the most overlooked areas of the hobby that doesn't get talked about in reviews on a consistent basis. We just hear about it after the fact of how the game played, but nobody really talks about, well, how was the teaching process from the rule book?
Yeah, and the rule book, a well-designed rule book accommodates multiple types of learners. And we've talked about this on and off, but Doug and I learn games in 2 very different ways. Doug can consume a rule book in 30 to 90 minutes, have it down, and be ready to teach. I spend hours with the rule book. I'm a grinder, but once I get it, I've got it. And so, I think that is a future School of Gaming episode. And then the second thing, I just, life's been tough. Yeah, and there's things that happen, and it's so nice to have friends to play board games with. And Doug and I we had a trade day, and then the next weekend I'm kind of, I'm going to the cabin to play board games with my friend Doug and my other friend Phil. One of those things. It's been on the calendar for 6 months. And boy, it is just awesome to be able to get together with people and have fun, get around the table, play games, and laugh. I really think it is something that we do a good job of celebrating at the Game Schooler podcast, but I just wanted to drop it in here. And so, thanks for being a good friend, Doug, and for playing games. And I appreciate that. I appreciate you. And it's something that I hope that we continue to play games and get to the table because it's special. It really is special.
No problem. I appreciate it. So thank you. Last week we didn't talk about what was on my shelf. We had a big hype show, so I hope everybody enjoyed that. The next shelf, we've got Animals on Board, which is a cool little tile drafting game in which I'm trying to think exactly how it works, but it's based on Noah's Ark, and you don't want to have, you do want to have a perfect pair, or you don't want to have a perfect pair. I don't quite remember exactly, but it's kind of you keep splitting them until you then take a section and add those to your boat. What's that?
Who made that one? Sorry.
It was a Stronghold game.
Okay.
And just a brief release. I really enjoy it, but it's probably one that when I got it was not, my kids weren't old enough, and now it's probably, not that it's a complicated game, it's just my kids were probably like 4 years old when I got it. But it would probably be an interesting one to pull out because I think that they would enjoy it at this point. The next one is Ares Expedition, the Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition, which is the card version of Terraforming Mars. And I really enjoy this version of the game. It moves pretty quickly. I have since gotten rid of my original copy of Terraforming Mars, and what's that?
You did, huh? I wondered if that was coming.
Yeah, because I think it's easier to set up, and it gives me the same feel with a little bit of an easier teach, and you kind of get rolling faster. So
I like the co-op and competitive mode in that game too. To me, that's a game where both modes work. So.
And they've released a couple of expansions for it that kind of even expand on what you can do cooperatively and things like that. So a cool addition there. The next one is Paper Tales, which is a card drafting game. But what's unique about it is that you have cards that you place into a grid, and they stay for a couple of generations. So a couple of rounds. So the first time you put it down there, and some cards get more valuable as the generations go on. Some of them get weaker. And when you play them out and when they last, and you're kind of doing a little bit of a comparison battle. And it's one of the few drafting games that I think has that sort of something else going on besides just draft and score points based on what you picked. And so I really like that other element. It makes you think while you're playing. And the last one on that shelf is we talked about in episode 80, which is the Quest for El Dorado, which is a deck building game from the good doctor Reiner Knizia. As you use cards to traverse the Amazon jungles, searching for the lost city of El Dorado. And if you want more detail, you can check out episode 80 for that one.
Now, which version do you have as of today? Do you have the original version, or did you get the cleaned up Ravensburger?
No, that is not one that I feel the need to upgrade. Nice. If I were just getting it now, I would obviously get the newer one. But I'm happy with what I have.
Good.
So. We've released another overview video, came out this past week, and we'll plan on releasing those hopefully weekly as we keep going forward and adding more content. So please like and subscribe to those YouTube videos. That really helps us out a lot. If you're interested in chatting with us, giving us some feedback on our School of Gaming or complaining about our high five list, you can head over to the Discord. Gameschooler.com/Discord, a great community of folks there. Some cool discussion about one of the users is visiting Japan, so we're finding out about some Japanese games, and just really interesting to see where people are at in their life and what they're playing and why and how and all of those good things. So,
and a nice little board game arena community has emerged there as well. So
Yes, exactly. And then spread the word about the podcast. And if you have any questions or comments, reach out to us. Email at gameschooler.com. With that out of the way, let's head over to the Game of the Week.
The Game of the Week. The Game of the Week is an in-depth look at a family-friendly game we think you should try if you get the chance. This week's game is Dabba Walla. Doug, give us the stats.
All right, published in 2024 by Queen Games. The designer is Felix Leder and Patricia Limburger. The art is also by Patricia Limburger. 2 to 4 players, about 45 minutes. Box says 8+. Board Game Geek says 8+. It's newer. I'm probably going to say 10+ to kind of grasp. But it's always such a crapshoot with some of these things where it's physically playable by an 8-year-old, but you're not going to get some of the great benefits out of it, or really investment engagement until you start getting up to that 10. But this is
I agree.
Definitely going to fall in that family games category for us.
Yep.
So the story of Dabba Walla is kind of interesting, of the theme behind it. And every morning in Mumbai, over 5,000 workers dressed in white swarm out to deliver more than 200,000 dabbas, which are multi-storied lunchboxes, to the offices of the Indian metropolis. These Dabba Walla have been an iconic fixture in the cityscape since 1890, and the food is freshly prepared at home by families, then collected from their front doors by the Dabba Walla. And even though some of the dabbas travel very far, they are delivered punctually via a network of intermediate stations with an amazing reliability of, get this, 99.999999%, which is one error out of every 16 million orders. Yeah, every 16 million orders is. So I wish Amazon could pick that up. 1 out of every 16 million orders. I get 1 out of every 3 is jacked up. So now it's time to join the Dabba Walla on their daily journey through Mumbai. So that is the theme of the game. And the game consists of 2 distinct phases. So you're going to complete the pickup phase and do that entire phase, and then move on to the delivery phase. In the pickup phase, you're going to take turns moving your Dabba Walla through Mumbai to collect Dabba cards. And each time you pick up a card, you then play one of the 3 in your hand to take a depicted Dabba tile, which is a polyomino of 1 to 4 squares. You're going to place into your cart, stacking the tiles higher and higher as the rounds progress. They come in 4 colors, and you must place them on flat surfaces, filling in holes with empty dabbas if needed. If you connect two half chai symbols, on tiles on the same level, you'll draw a random chai tea tile with a bonus action. And you're going to keep all of the played cards in a personal discard pile. So you're going to keep adding polyominoes to this little grid on your board, which is a cart, and you keep stacking them up as high as you want. You can choose to build efficiently or higher, depending on what you choose. The next phase is you're going to deliver all of them that you have collected, and you're going to collect 15 tiles throughout the first pickup phase. So you will be delivering those 15 tiles in the delivery phase. So after everyone has placed their 15 tiles on their card, it's time to deliver them. Pick up all the cards you have played and then complete a number of delivery rounds equal to the highest level that somebody has stacked their dabbas. So if Michael has stacked up to 7 layers and I've only stacked up to 5, we're going to score 7 times because you're going to remove 1 layer off per turn.
But only I'm going to score in that round 7 and that round 6
correct.
Because Doug wasn't involved in that.
Yep. And each round, each player will play and reveal 1 Dabba card from their hand. So those are the cards that you collected in the first half of the game. On the top of half of those cards are the Dabba tiles. On the bottom are adjustment values that determine how many tips you're going to get for delivering certain colored dabbas, certain lunch boxes. So each round, each player plays and reveals 1 Dabba card from their hand, and you can play some chai tiles as well. Some of those will also manipulate that little market. The sum the value of each color of Dabba, then everyone scores their dabbas on the current level based on these values. So, for example, you might increase the value of red dabbas up to 2, which means that every square of dabbas that you sell is going to be worth 2 at the end of the round. You're going to sell those or get tips from them, deliver them, and remove them from your cards. Once all the dabbas have been delivered, players score for any remaining chai tiles that they have, which give you special bonuses throughout the round. If you don't spend them, you get bonuses for them. And then whoever has collected the most tips from their deliveries wins. So that is how you play Dabba Walla. What do you like about it, Michael?
I love the decision making where you have just a few cards in your hand, and then you get to move around the table as well. And those in the 3-player game, the one that we played, you start off with these six little. They almost look like little newspaper tiles.
They're
I'm
like
not sure.
Tickets. I think they're tickets.
Tickets, and if you don't spend them, they're worth 1 point each at the end of the game. And it's very clear that points are going to be tight. So I love that in the first phase, that initial decision of how bad do I want the tile over there versus the other two options that are in my hand. And I can see in repeated plays of the game over and over and over, just no two games ever playing the same, because there's just a great amount of randomness that's included as those polyominoes are emerging. So I really enjoyed that first phase of the game, the moving around the table to get the polyominoes in, to try to connect the chies, to get little bonuses. I know that just how, as a player, I really love those little bonuses. And so just it seemed like the game had enough of them to have 3 or 4 decisions on my turn. Not 7 or 10, but sometimes I'm bored in polyomino games, Doug. I really am, because it's like, well, I could do this decision or that decision. Okay, this is clearly a family game. But for this family game, the tactical and strategic, how it was blended in that first phase, man, I loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Yeah, I love that the game has the two distinct phases of the game. Mm-hmm. And the first half gets me worried about whether I want to be efficient in stacking my tiles, or if I just want to go high and go crazy, I can do that. But then also kind of having to pay attention to the values on the bottom of the cards, because usually in a concept similar to like Reef, if I'm adding a card that's going to give me red Dabbas, that card at the bottom is not going to increase the value of red Dabbas. It's going to increase one of the other colors. So you kind of have to watch out of, should I started building a bunch of red. Now I need to get red scoring cards to make sure I can get value out of those later in the game.
Let me just jump in there and take that a little bit further too, and then you tell me where I'm wrong. It's such a good point. And in the initial demo, when I saw this, a few weeks ago, I didn't pick up on the importance of that. So the bottom half of the cards are going to play out in the second phase, and it's somewhat a blind. You're going to bid, like a reverse bid, where you're going to throw out, okay, so this round, everything that's red and green, red's going to be worth 2, green's going to be worth 1, and then 1, 2, 3, we flip. And then if other people also put in red, that's going to increase the value of that. But if I didn't collect any of those in the first phase, I'm not going to score out at all. So that you have to pay attention to that and get those cards played so that you have them in basically the payment round. I know they don't call it the payment round, but that's
the delivery. It becomes a thing too where it's There's also the struggle of, okay, do I fill if I fill an entire row with one color, I have a little bit more control when I play that delivery card later, because I can make sure, I want to increase red by 2. So I think for sure red's probably going to score out and I'm going to be okay. If you diversify, you might be able to pick up, Michael's got a lot of yellow, so he might play a yellow card, which will help my yellow on there.
Yep.
So you're trying to kind of balancing both of those at the same time, because then what happens is, Michael's assumes I'm playing a red or whatever, and then all of a sudden I'm not scoring for any of those yellow tiles or something if you diversify too much. So those simple decisions that have big implications is one of the things that I really like, that it is a family weight approachable game with long-term repercussions and things in strategy that develops after multiple plays, that you can see people growing and that there's layers to it. This is definitely, for me, an onion game where it's like the initial one is great, but it's got so many layers that once you start playing it several times, you're like, ooh, maybe I should pay attention to this. Maybe I should just, get this thing as high as I can, even though I'm only going to be scoring one or, 3 Dabbas every round, but I've got 5 scoring rounds where nobody else is scoring, and trying to balance some of those things. So that back and forth is really cool.
Yeah, and I enjoyed the interaction at the table too. So sometimes, like I'm building a 3x3 grid in front of me, and I'm trying to build it the best that I can. Well, and the term that's often used in a game like that will be a multiplayer solitaire, right? But the interaction in that phase 1 of where people are going, I can't just have my head down and be only concerned with my board because of what you talked about. If you don't notice that I'm going all in on yellows, and if you don't ever select a yellow polyomino and get it placed, you're going to miss out on those points. And so that's another part of the onion. I think there's a lot of player interaction and watching what others are doing at the table.
Yeah.
It's not vicious, it's not mean, but that observation, you really have to be looking at what's going on. If you're going to play this game more than 1 or 3 times, like if this is a game that you're going to add to your family calyx, your family shelf, and let's say you keep 20 to 25 games in rotation and you're discerning about Dabba Walla, I think you have observational skills. I think you have definitely strategy and tactical thinking that we've talked about, but I love the economics of the game as well. That conversion of how I'm going to take this in phase 1 and turn it in phase 2 for cold hard points.
Well, the idea that it combines almost a polyomino tile laying game with a mini stock market game where those values, the values of the Dabbas reset every round that you're delivering. So it's like, it's great that it was worth 3 last time, but it may not be 3 again the next time. And so that resetting. The other cool thing about, I want to show the visual aid here.
Ooh, we got props.
Is now I can't attest to the punching out of this game because it was already punched for me when I got it from Queen Games. They had already punched that out. However, all of the tiles fit into these little, good demo, Doug, these little boxes like this, and the lids come off and they become the player board, or the main game board for the game. And then all of the tiles are, this is to give people a reason to go watch a YouTube video, are in these little grids, are all set up ready to go. So setup and takedown is a breeze, and the storage in the box is awesome. There's like no wasted space in this thing because you just pick it up, set it out, and you're kind of ready to go.
Your startup time after it's initially punched out is 0.
Yeah. So I really wanted to highlight that. The other thing that's kind of cool about this game that I like is, like Michael said, no game is really going to be the same because there are so many unique combinations of way that things come out and ways players are building up and how they're going to score out at the end of the game. So there's a lot of variety in the base game. However, the game has like 3 or 4 different modules, and in this case, there are different boards that you can, polyomino shapes that you can stack your lunch boxes on that change the way some of those pieces work together. So I'm intrigued by that. There's also a couple of other modules that just change where, for example, you have to fill in each row completely before you move on to the next one. Things like that add those tiny variations without a huge overhaul of the whole game mechanisms.
Yeah.
And they add an increased challenge. I know another one increases the amount of cards that need to be played before a Dabba will get tips. So it's even harder to get tips out of that color, for example. So that's the type of variety that I like in a game. Just give me a couple of little things that can spice up without changing the entire core game or being a whole separate expansion box.
And Doug is not one who gets this excited about a game often. So, Doug, I'm going to send you a softball, okay? And not a College World Series softball like we're playing in a tavern league, slow pitch. I'm going to really throw it up in the air for you.
Uh-oh.
Why are we talking about this now? We had initially talked about talking about it down the road because we just did Queen Games in our last game of the week with Kingdom Builder, and we're not sponsored by Queen Games. But so why should our listeners know about Dabba Walla today?
Because this game is on Kickstarter right now, and it's essentially more of a pre-order than your typical Kickstarter project. Because it's delivering in August, and the Kickstarter ends on June 8th. So shortly after, you got a couple of days left after this podcast releases. There's, I think June 8th, right?
Yeah.
No, June 13th.
June 13th. 8 more days from today.
And it's $35, which the MSRP is going to be $50. It's $35, and if you're in the U.S., $10 to ship. So just based off of MSRP, you're $5 less than MSRP. I thought it's a pretty good deal to get a game like that. That like I said is estimated to deliver in August, and I think it'll show up at Gen Con and shortly in retail shortly after that. So we were going to talk about this in a couple of weeks, but I didn't want to talk about it and then have people, if people were interested,
just recently missed out on it.
Yeah. Oh, shoot. It just ended 5 days ago. Thanks, Game Schooler Podcast. And normally we're not ones to talk about hype, but I think this really just fits in that genre of family games that I want to champion because it does such a good job of being what it is. What about skills, Michael? I know you mentioned observation. You got any other ones that really stand
also
out to you?
Strategic and tactical thinking. Those were the two or the three that I wanted to bring in. Do you have one? Because I have another one, but
well, I've got spatial perception. As you're placing those lunch boxes out, and I think the resource management of not only managing your chai tiles, but those. I really think about it in collecting those. The Dabba cards for the bottom half and managing to make sure that you've got enough going into the second round to capitalize on the stacks that you've built.
Yeah, that's great. I also have concentration, and we haven't talked about this skill in a while, and that's a game that encourages players to focus their attention or efforts on a task. The base side, I'm not sure what terms Queen uses, so apologies, but the 3x3 grid, you've got to really concentrate on where those polyominoes fit. And for adult gamers who do this and play it, no. But if you're playing with younger gamers or even people who are new to the hobby, that can require a level of concentration.
Yeah.
And then the flip side of each board, instead of a 3x3, it really looks like a basket where that middle row is pulled down one, so it's not actually a perfect square. It's an odder looking shape, not an otter as an animal, but an odd looking shape, but like a bicycle basket. And I thought, boy, that would really require a higher level of concentration. So those were the 4 skills that I wanted to bring to the table today.
Yeah, and the only thing I have on the things to be aware of, I think during the teach of this game, explaining that there are 2 distinct phases that we will go through entirely before we go to the next one. And I think it's actually a game that the game plays pretty quickly, that I think this might benefit from that kind of forced sale style demo that we've talked about in the past, where it's like, all right, the first time of this is all we're doing is filling up these carts. It's all you have to worry about. Don't worry about anything else. Then we're going to flip the board over and do the other side. And that's as a teaching game, and knowing that, yes, some people are not going to have the scoring cards, but then you see how and why you need to pick stuff up.
But I love how fast you skipped over that. Doug, that could be brutal with the wrong group. If you get people who are highly competitive
Well,
and you don't explain the scoring. No, I know. I like
I'm not
in
talking
theory
about
what
that
you're
group.
saying.
I'm not talking about that
hey,
group.
Hey,
I'm
hey.
not.
All right, easy. We haven't had disagreement about 57 episodes, but I'm just saying, if in theory, I think that could work for a lot of groups. We're going to play this first phase. But you got to know the gamers at the table, because the bottom half of the cards, that's how everything is scored, is the entire second phase.
That's for new gamers and family, younger gamers.
People who aren't going to flip the table or drop the people's elbow on your forehead. The only thing to note, the caveat, I feel like this game can end abruptly the first couple of times you play it. It's just that sense of, just be clear on explaining when that first phase ends, because all of a sudden the game plays fast is what I'm trying to say. And I think sometimes there is a little bit of a ramp up. This game's not classified as an engine builder, but you feel your engine building as your stacks are getting higher and higher and higher and higher. So when you're doing the teach, and Doug did a great job of that with us, and when I saw the demo of it, they did it as well. But I could see if I'm teaching this game 3 or 4 or 6 months from now to people, that's one note that I'll want to put on my note card. Just it plays fast, and that can be abrupt for some folks.
Yeah, and I think that fastness is what lends me. Otherwise, I wouldn't make that recommendation. The fastness, it's like you can play it without really caring very quickly, and then flip over and score, and then be like, this is one of those games where you're like, all right, let's play this again. Now that I got it, let's roll again. And then to be able to say, all right, we're going to throw this wrinkle in now. We're going to throw that one now that everybody knows the game, and you keep going like that. Very intriguing to me. So it's a game that the first time I played it, it was just clicking for me. I'm like, this is doing so many cool things that work, and it is a family game that does so many things right of being simple and having layers, which is really important. And that Kickstarter is going until June 13th, so check that out if you're interested in that game. Otherwise, it'll be should have wide release later in August and in September. And that is our game of the week, Dabba Walla from Queen Games. Let's move on to the School of Gaming.
The School of Gaming. In the School of Gaming, we discuss concepts, keywords, etiquette, and helpful ideas in the world of gaming. This week, we're going to interview Keith Matejka, CEO, Thunderworks Games, and critically acclaimed game designer. Welcome to the Game Schooler podcast, Keith.
Thank you.
What are you chuckling at? You don't get an intro like that whenever you walk into work?
I got to get a recording of that so that it triggers every time I walk in the door. And then confetti machine that shoots confetti into the air and applause. No, it's just it's a very kind intro.
You're acclaimed. It's official.
It is. I have been acclaimed, I guess, but it's accepting compliments is probably not my strongest suit, but that's something to work on.
Well, that's a good thing. Don't want to be too braggadocious about it. A little humbleness is nice once in a while, especially in the board game industry. So, yes, Keith, you are the owner and CEO of Thunderworks Games.
Out of Madison, Wisconsin. That's right.
Out of Madison, Wisconsin. How did you get started?
Oh, man. So let's say 2000, I should know this number, 2013. Basically, I was working at a video game developer. I worked in video games for 15 years and got into board gaming, started, kind of the advent of Kickstarter was a thing. I saw people having success. I remember, I was a backer of Glory to Rome, which was one of the first big Kickstarters, and what was it, Alien Frontiers. So I was kind of in there at the beginning. I was getting big into board games, and Jamie Stegmaier and the James Matthews of the world were kind of posting blogs about how they do board games on Kickstarter, and my ignorance said, that doesn't seem so hard. And so me and my friends, we started designing some games in our free time, and I had a small game that I decided I wanted to try to do the Kickstarter. So I was doing, and I was successful with that, and then did a couple additional projects, and then once kind of Role Player hit, I was able to kind of decide to do it full time. So I kind of quit my day job, and then I just kind of focused on that. So the company was established officially in 2013. I think the first game, Bullfrogs, came out in 2014, and then I did a small game called Blend Off from another designer, and then Role Player was 2016, and then everything started rolling, right? So once you have an evergreen, a title that's likely to be reprinted multiple times, you can kind of double down and really dig in and do cooler stuff and take risks on things, and you've got a bigger marketing budget and a bigger art budget, and you can kind of, everything starts to get better. So since then, I would say probably 2000, man, I always forget the date, but I want to say it's 19 that I quit my day job and went full time, and so then it was just me working out of my basement for a long time, and I guess that was probably 18, and then in 19 I kind of I basically got out of the basement, got myself a little office space in a warehouse, and then, hired a couple people. First, my wife to do sales and marketing, and then, Kirk Dennison to do operational and finance stuff. And so it's been kind of steady growth over the years. I was kind of bringing on one person a year for a while, and we're currently at 4 full-timers and 1 part-timer, and obviously lots of contractors to help get these things done. But the role that I currently fill is just kind of development, design, kind of company vision. I do all the art direction for all our games, and so I'm kind of the kind of core creative person, I guess. But obviously, there's a lot of creative people in our organization. But I guess I get to control that vision, and it's been a fun ride.
Cool. I think, and you touched upon it there, you have, several people working for you. It's not a one-person production, and there are certainly a lot of moving parts that go into getting a game off the ground. Can you explain for our listeners what the process is, broadly speaking, from going idea to game store on a shelf in a game store?
Sure, yeah. I mean, there's always lots of ideas, right? So ideas are very plentiful. The tricky part is figuring out which ideas do you want to invest in. Which ones are you going to put, 2,000 hours into? Or so it usually starts with a design. So either my own or from another designer, and then that gets signed. And then we usually go through a development process in which we're refining it, and making sure that kind of taking it to that last 100% level. And while it's happening, we start to figure out what if we like the theme on it, do we want to change the theme, and we start commissioning artwork for it, and that's the illustrations that get done. And then there's always an evaluation period, kind of before you get too far, to take a look at all the components and get some manufacturing quotes with the manufacturer to figure out how much is this going to cost to make. And that dictates to some degree where you can be for the final MSRP, for the final price. And you evaluate whether you think people are willing to pay that amount for that game, or if you think there's enough profit margin in this game to move forward on too far. And once you kind of feel that and you get the art going, we continue to do play testing internally as kind of things are coming together. You have a graphic designer comes in, starts laying out the rule book, starts putting text and icons on cards and all that kind of stuff. And then you make a decision as to how are we going to fund this game, whether it's going to be kind of funded internally, in which that usually will mean that game is going to just come out straight to retail and it's going to get on the store shelves, or if you're going to use a crowdfunding platform like Kickstarter or GameFound, in which you're going to present the game to the public and ask people to kind of invest in it and help get it off the ground. We've done a mix of those two methods. I think now we're kind of leaning more towards the Kickstarter path than the straight to retail path, but They're both very viable, and different companies kind of do it different ways. But once we've got kind of all the graphic design and the illustrations in place, and our development is complete, it's going to feel like a pretty close to final game. Then we usually do what are called cold play tests, where we send out the game to just random people who sign up that they want to help us. And
you can call them randos. That's fine.
Yeah, you can call them randos. That's fine here. They can't be completely rando because they sign up to help you. It's not like my ma is getting a copy of the next tale in the Role Player Adventure Saga.
What's in the mail
What's
today,
this,
honey?
Michael? What did this Keith Matejka send me?
Yeah, so and then those guys will play, we don't give them any real guidance. It's like we're basically testing the rule book to see how easy the game is to learn, see what questions people have to make sure that we don't have any blind spots in the way that we teach the game and stuff like that. And then once we're feeling pretty good about it, then it turns into we either run a Kickstarter or we just send it off to manufacturing. That takes roughly, we manufacture in China. Most board game publishers do because they have the expertise over there, and so that's usually like a 6 to 9 month process in terms of like getting the printing done and everything acclimated and assembled and put onto pallets and sent over the oceans, and then into distribution hubs, and then they go out to the world. There's also the sales element of it, in which we're like talking to retailers, talking to distributors, showing them the game early, seeing kind of how many copies they think they'd want to order, so we can estimate how many copies to print, because printing the right number of copies is a critical part of the process. Because if you overprint, then you're going to end up paying lots of storage fees to have this thing sit in a warehouse for months and months and months. And if you underprint, then you've lost the opportunity, to meet the demand for the game. So that's always an important piece. But then it's up to our sales and marketing folks to educate distributors and retailers about the game. Do a lot of social media posting, work with content creators to let them show off our game, and then just kind of process those orders and make sure that people are getting the games that they want. So that's kind of the high level piece of it. But I don't know. Does that cover it? I don't know.
I covered a lot.
So.
I mean, if Doug and I aren't interrupting, that means we have somebody really smart on the podcast, and we usually like to let smart people tell their story. That was really good. Doug, do you mind if I jump into Ulos, or did you want? Okay,
no,
so
go ahead.
Keith, I'd love to hear more about Ulos. How did that world come about, and what is it like to create an entire universe where games take place?
Well, sorry to interrupt, but just to kind of get some ground floor, Ulos is the world that Role Player operates in, and several games have then come out since then in the Ulos universe.
Right. So, yeah, like you said, Ulos is our fantasy universe. A bunch of our games take place in there. The world of Ulos came out kind of by accident, right? So we started with a game called Role Player, which is about it's a dice drafting game in which you're trying to build a fantasy character, like a fantasy role-playing game. And that was designed intentionally to be kind of as generic as possible, so that when people are building their characters, they can kind of imprint whatever like fantasy details they want, right? We give you some keywords, some general ideas, but it lets the players kind of do a little bit of imagining of what their character is like as they're playing it. So, that game became very popular. People wanted more, so the expansion, we had like monsters that you could fight. So okay, now we have monsters in the world that this game takes place in, and then there was some other kind of fantasy games that we were thinking about doing, and the comment came up as like, well, these games might as well be in the same universe. So then we're like, okay, so then Lockup came out, so that takes place in this fantasy prison, and with each one of these games, we kind of start, it's like we're adding like rubber bands to a rubber band ball. Like the world is getting bigger, more details are coming about, and then kind of the big drop in the lore bucket was when we published Role Player Adventures, which is a narrative fantasy adventuring game. If you have a narrative, you have to have like locations and characters and political conflict and deities and
Hard
all
to
these
pronounce
different things.
names.
Awesome metal coins.
You need metal coins, or else you can't play it. So then we basically kind of started really kind of adding to the world, and some of the newer games like Emerald Skulls, which is coming to Kickstarter on July 2nd. Plug and Goblin Vaults. Those are kind of games from within the games that already exist. So we're kind of expanding the world there. We did a game called Dawn of Ulos, it was all about the different gods in the world. So it's been really fun because it's similar to, we don't have a grand plan that we've been executing, right? To me, it's always gameplay first, find the great games, and then we'll figure out if we can work it in the world. Cool. If not, then we'll put a different theme on it. But if it's a fantasy game coming from Thunderworks, it's going to be in this shared universe. And all these games are they're in the same universe, so they're kind of connected by lore, but mechanically they're entirely separate, right? So I don't have to know anything about the world of Ulos to play Cartographers. I can still enjoy it. I don't need to know, anything about King Terran and Nalos or anything like that. But if you are familiar with that stuff and you're into it, then there's lots of little Easter eggs and kind of wink, wink, nod, nods, kind of connections between the games, which I think is fun. So that's been the kind of the philosophy of the strategy for putting out the different World of Ulos fantasy games. Even things like the words Ulos didn't exist until like the fourth or fifth game in the world, right? We didn't really give the world a name until the third or fourth game. So it's been an evolutionary kind of process in terms of making games for it.
Awesome. What do you think of the best part about being a publisher is?
Well, the best thing about being publisher is that I get to make the games that I want to make, and they're going to look the way I want them to look, and they're going to play the way I want them to play. So as a publisher, at the end of the day, you kind of have complete control because you're the one putting up all the money to make this thing happen. So in my role, I get, as the art director and is kind of doing a lot of development, the games, I have to like the way they play, or else we're not making this game. And I have to like the way it looks, or else we're getting new artwork done. So if you're just a designer, I should say just a designer. If you're a designer licensing your game to a publisher, you give up some control to some degree, right? You're leaning on the expertise of that publisher. They're supposed to, understand the market. They're supposed to, they're the one investing the money, and they're the ones that have the sales channels, so a lot of times designers don't have a whole lot of control over their game once it gets into a publisher's hands. And a lot of designers welcome that. Sometimes it's like the designer's worried about the mechanics, and then I'll let the publisher do what they do. But sometimes that means a game will come out with your name on it that doesn't look like the way you expected it to, or maybe you don't even like the way it looks. Or most of the time, the publisher isn't going to change a whole lot mechanically, but during the development process, there might be some, significant changes that the publisher feel are strengthen the game, and it's kind of up to the designer whether they agree or not. But usually, at the end of the day, the publisher can do what they want to do in terms of making the final call on design changes. So I like I don't want to say I'm a control freak, but I like looking at something on the shelf and saying, that is the thing that I made. That's the thing that I decided how it was going to look, what the final gameplay was going to be like, and whose hands it was going to get into. So, that's the thing about being a board game publisher, is that you don't need a massive company. You don't need, opposed to when I worked in video games where you need like 500 people to finish a Call of Duty game or more. Here it's like we can get this game done with like less than 10 people, and everybody has a lot of influence on the final product, and you really get invested in the things that you're working on, and that's super fun.
Awesome. What else you got, Michael?
Why don't you take your next question? I like that next question in line about what he likes best. Why don't you ask him the other side of that?
What's the worst part about being a publisher? Dealing with designers.
I mean, the worst part about being the publisher is that it's the board game market can be unpredictable, right?
Yeah.
You don't know what these things take so long to make, So we might start working on a project, and the day it hits the shelves, if it's within a year and a half, that's a short timeline. But some of these games take 2 years, 3 years. For example, you should ask Steven about the timeline on Metro Runner. But sometimes these take a long time to finish, or to go through the entire process. And just because you believe in something and you think it's great and you try to tell the whole world about how amazing it is, sometimes the gaming public isn't on board. So that can be tough when you pour your soul into something, and people don't seem to love it as nearly as much as you do. And like sales suffer, and it's not blowing up, and it's a little disheartening, right? Because you put yourself into these things, you feel like they represent you to some degree, right? And when they don't do amazing, it can be tough, man. It's like an emotional blow. But
hearing you describe it, Keith, it almost sounds like you're describing one of your own kids, maybe not performing as well as their peers, but enough. You're still proud of them, right? You're like, hey, my kid's doing the best they can. Look, the kid's still awesome.
He's got a box.
Yeah, I've got a game sitting behind me here that I have been a huge hype man for, and that's Cape May. From the first time I played it, it's probably appeared on 10 of our episodes in a mention at some point, either on, hey, we played it this weekend or saw it again, or it's on sale, or it's on one of our high five lists. There was about a 20 episode period where we were talking about it constantly. And it's a great game. I mean, I stand by it. I hope to play it a few times every year for as long as I'm playing games. And I know that's – I'm not saying that that's an example for you, but just, when I see where it's on sale, and it's like, hey, Cape May's on sale again. If you haven't played this one yet, give it a try. So I can't imagine what that's like. You mentioned 2,000 hours in something that just doesn't quite work. The question I'm wondering about that I'm building towards, I want to circle back to, you play games and you play test games. How do you know when it's time to greenlight a game where it's, yep, we wanna sign this? What's that process like for you and for Thunderworks?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, it is like your kids to some degree, and sometimes it's hard to like, get. It's just sometimes hard to deal with when like the world doesn't see. And there's also, like, as you gentlemen know, there are thousands of games that come out every year, so it's really hard to kind of stick out in the crowd. So when podcasters or whoever make an effort to highlight our games, I super appreciate it. But when it comes to like figuring out when a game is ready to, like, okay, development's done, I wish there was a scientific process, but there's not, right? So it's really a gut feeling. I play a lot of games, and there's a huge gaming community here in Madison. Lots of people play a lot of games, and all designers play each other's games all the time. I'm probably playing board games at least 4 nights a week.
That's awesome.
Whether a mix of published stuff versus prototypes, you just have this feeling like there's no more questions. If you're playtesting something and the only comments you're getting are like little things about like the graphic design or like the way the lore is presented or something like that, it's like, the game's in pretty good shape if like the only things people have anything to say about are either things that are going to change or things that don't matter about for gameplay. So that's one telltale sign. But there is a lot of, like, you just keep playing it, and then when you're done and you're like, I don't think there's any changes at this point, then you're like, okay, this is it. And sometimes you feel like it's not done, but you're not sure why, and you just put it on the shelf for a week, and then you come back to it, or you find a different group to play it with, or you send it to a different group and see how they respond. And obviously sometimes people complain about something, or they have concerns about some element of the game. That doesn't necessarily mean that's something that needs to fix. Sometimes that just means that group doesn't like that particular element, or they didn't grasp one of the mechanics as well as we had hoped, and maybe it's more like a rulebook problem than a mechanical problem. Or trying to decipher user feedback into something that's actionable is definitely difficult and a skill, and that's something kind of that me and other game designers and publishers have kind of built that skill over the years of just playing games and kind of figuring out how to get to the finish line, because very rarely is it like go from point A. Like somebody says this character's overpowered. Okay, their attack value goes down too. It's like that's usually not the solution, right? It's usually some other thing that may have nothing to do with that character or whatever.
You got to hear that complaint like 4 times before you even consider that might be an option, right?
Sometimes. I mean, it depends on where you are in the process. You know, when you're first working on a game, it's important to make big changes. It's like, oh, somebody doesn't like this part that much. Let's swap out the entire system and do something different. Whereas as you get further along, my interest in making changes, bigger changes, goes down and down and down. So I'm like, okay, we're getting near the end. Maybe this value should be a 3 instead of a 2. Maybe, I'm not going to say, okay, your hand size is now 6 instead of 4. Like, that's a big change. It can make the game feel a lot different. So you kind of hone in on what you consider kind of perfection for that game over time. And by the end, you're just making tiny little adjustments, and then you're like, I think it's done. And then if you're not sure, you wait a week and you try it again and make sure that you think it's done.
Hit him with the trademark question, Doug.
All right, what's awesome about gaming?
Laughing and fun and time with friends.
I second that. That's a good answer.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I've got one more that we tend to ask when we have a designer on. What's a hidden gem? Keith, we asked this to Phil Walker Harding back in episode 104, and I was immediately at Noble Night the next week looking for his hidden gem. So we'll see how it goes here. But what's a game? Maybe it's not even from Thunderworks, but what's a game you've been playing lately where you're just like, man, this is a game that people need to know about, because our Discord community, they play some games.
I hope he doesn't say a $600 game.
I got 2. I got one almost $600 game that I played with Steven last night, which was Chaos in the Old World.
Oh.
Great game. Definitely, the original version came out in 2009. There's some definitely 2009 things about it, but it's a great game. I think it goes for about $250.
Yeah, where did you play it at by chance?
Noble, I think goes for $400, which is crazy. But the game that I would recommend, that I recommended people more recently, is because Heat was has been a hot game over the last year, and so racing games are kind of big. We're kind of had a resurgence and downforce, and I said, hey, you should go play Snowtails, because that is my racing game of choice. And I think there's a lot of people that missed that one or kind of entered the hobby after that one came out and stuff. It's a cool dog sled racing game that has like a really clever steering mechanic where you're steering a pair of dog sleds. You set their speeds, and if one is going faster than the other one, then you turn in that direction. And the difference of their speeds determines how sharply or how softly you turn. And you can build the track however you want whenever you play.
And what about, is there a hidden gem in the Thunderworks library?
I mean, our library is, I would say, small and growing. I mean, I think we have 12 to 15 games. It depends if you count expansions and stuff. But Lockup is the game, I think. There's a lot of people skipped on Lockup. It kind of came out at the same time as Cartographers did, and kind of Cartographers blew up. But Lockup is a really cool game, and there aren't many games like it.
Yeah.
Especially if you have 4 or 5 players, it can be a rowdy, raucous time. And if you want that laughter and time with friends kind of game, I think Lockup is a good pick from Thunderworks that doesn't get as much time in the spotlight as some of our other titles.
I think you'd like that one, Michael.
I've played it.
Oh, you have?
Yeah. I played Lockup at GameholeCon.
Oh, okay.
So yeah. No, I concur. I enjoy it.
All right, tell us about your new Kickstarter coming up, or two Kickstarters.
July 2nd, Kickstarter, Emerald Skulls. It is a press your luck dice rolling game where one person is rolling dice and they're placing them on this board. There's kind of the sequence, like you can only place on one die like value at a time on a level, and you can't place on a previously placed level, so you kind of have to go up this ladder. But the thing is, all the other players are bidding on what the results are going to be. So everybody's involved in everybody's turn. The base game plays 1 to 6 players. Like every Thunderworks title, we always play down to 1 for sure. This one goes up to 6. I think that's the highest we've ever had. And if you back the Kickstarter campaign, you also get a free 7 and 8 player mini expansion with it. Actually, that's not true. We have a level in which you can get a 7 and 8 player expansion. And so this game takes place in Callback Prison, which is the same place as Lockup takes place in, but it's a dice game that the prisoners or whatever play, and it has a sister game called Goblin Vaults, which came out last year. It's a card game, and we're going to offer a cool bigger box that you can have Goblin Vaults and Emerald Skulls in the same box, and it's got a tray of tokens because both games use the same currency, these gear tokens. And it's going to have a play mat that fits in the box. One side is Emerald Skulls, the other side is Goblin Vaults. And then we also have a cool add-on in which you can get Metal Gears, which are amazing. And there's also, we did a plushie for one of our more recent Kickstarters called Stone Spine Architects. We've got a plushie coming out for Emerald Skulls. So if you like Goblin plushies, we got you covered over there.
Michael, are you trying to put money into the computer right now?
No, I'm trying. It wouldn't allow it. Although it said July 2nd, no, it would not take my money. I was looking at different exchanges, and then all those warnings came up on Google. Yeah. I'm like, I better get out of here.
Yeah, well, so we're super excited, July 2nd. So the designer is also named Steven. And he's also local here in Madison. So I tend to work with a lot of local folks because we have a really strong board game and gaming community in this town, as you guys know. And Stephen Dast is the designer. He's a local designer. I've been playing his prototypes for years. I'm super excited to work together with him. And it's super fun. I mean, I've told people this a couple times, but there's something magical about Emerald Skulls. Because like even people come up to me at around town or at gaming events, and I don't even know them, or I barely even know them or whatever, and they're like, hey, I played that dice game from Stephen Dast that you're publishing at this prototype event. That game is awesome. And I was like, I know. But so yeah, there's it's really good, and it does really well at high player counts. And I think everybody's gonna have a good time with it, man.
That's awesome. Can't wait to give that one a try. Also can't wait to play the final version of Stone Spire Architects. I played a prototype, and so I'm looking to get, or Stone Spine. I continue to call it Stone Spire. Apologies. I'm looking forward to get a final version to the table here and get that one going.
Yeah.
Anything else, Keith, for our listeners that you want to share?
Well, probably most importantly, in the next month, our Kickstarter backers are going to start receiving their copies of Metro Runner, and then it's going to be officially released at Gen Con come the first weekend of August. So this is our cyberpunk themed kind of rondel, like you're a runner hanging around, you're running around town, completing jobs, building your little engine, and then it's got this cool 3x3 grid of tiles that has this hacking puzzle in the middle. And that is, of course, designed by Stephen Kerr from Madison, Wisconsin.
Now, hey, don't take too much of that, because that's next week's School of Gaming. So
right.
We got to be smart with our content here. And just as a savvy publisher stretches out their product roadmap across 3, 4, I think you were talking about projects that are how many years down the road from idea to shelf? Yeah, we really look forward to hearing all about that in next week's School of Gaming.
Awesome. Yeah.
All right. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for spending the time with us, Keith. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, before you take us out, I hope that I'm no longer in that rando fanboy category. Now that you've been on the show, I hope I'm at least elevated to guy where it's okay if he's at the warehouse, or yeah, I might shake his hand without looking around once. Hey, I got the metal coins and I've got all the games, but no, go ahead, Doug. Take us out of here. Thanks for being on, Keith.
Yeah, we appreciate it. And check out Thunderworks Games. Their Kickstarter's coming out, and watch out for Metro Runner when that starts hitting the shelves in August. So thanks again, Keith. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
If you're anything like us, you're constantly on hunt for new games to try out. This week, Michael and I are going to be talking about games to play at a convention or a con.
It's convention season, Doug.
It is. It is ticking up. Origins is right around the corner. Gen Con after that, and a whole slew of other ones, local conventions. I don't know why the weather gets better and gamers want to get inside and game.
Isn't that wild? I've wondered the same thing. Maybe it's just because how it emerged. That's when people have vacation time to burn.
Yeah,
but
no, gamers just want to stay indoors. They're averse
too
to
beautiful
nature.
outside.
Yeah.
Way too much sun out there.
So in
A
putting
walk?
together this,
People want to go walking?
only to Hall A to Hall B. I'll do that walk, but not outside. Gosh, are you insane? In putting together this list, I originally intended, I'm going to do specific games. And it quickly evolved or devolved into, no, there's more categories I want to talk about of these are good types of games to play at a con.
To 10 minutes later, I got a text message. I'm not talking about any games. And it made sense because in the thread, I could see how Doug's thinking evolved or devolved or emerged. So, yeah, let's go.
All right, let's see what you got, Michael.
Number 5 for me is games taught by the publisher. If I am at a convention, and I'm very, very fortunate to be near Madison, Wisconsin, and one of our conventions is Gamehole Con, and I know we talk about it a lot, so I don't want to oversell it, but one of my favorite things about Gamehole Con is Thunderworks teaches all their games there. So Dawn of Ulos, Lockup, those are 2 examples of games that I have been taught by the publisher. And then I end up usually walking home with one of those under my shoulder because now I feel like, all right, I know the rules. I got to play it. I got to go all out. Got to play with the nice blinged out metal coins. And so that's my number 5.
Awesome. Now, that's a great choice. Not on my list, but that's a good one. The number 5 for me is games that require a higher player count. And so the initial one, that people think about is something like Werewolf or some of those large social deduction games. And party games. However, there's a slew of games that are on my shelf that play, 5 to 6 or 7, or maybe the player count starts at 4, but it really excels when it gets to 8, and that's where it maxes out. I'm thinking of there's the Game of Thrones Oathbreaker, there's a Hail
Shadows
Hydra as a Marvel one, a Seven Wonders, where it's like, it may not be that you're, 7 Wonders, you might get to the table frequently, but how often you get it to the table with the full 7 players and being able to experience those games that are, now I'm not talking about a game that never should be played at 5 because it's so slow at 2 or 3.
Yeah, no, you're talking about games that play great at a higher player count.
At that high player count that and maybe games that you really love that you play all the time, but you don't get a chance to experience it because your game group isn't big enough or you're not used to that, where you can sign up, like I said, for a full game of 7 Wonders with all 7 players and just see and experience that one time, I think is pretty cool. So games that require a higher player count. Awesome.
Number 4 for me, games that take more than an hour to set up and more than 2 hours to play. Yeah. So I initially had 6 on the list, and the hour to set up was an honorable mention. I was like, no, we'll just do a little conjunction here and combine the 2. And if somebody maybe hasn't been to a convention, or if somebody goes to a lot of conventions, they might be thinking, this guy's ridiculous. What's he talking about? Well, here's what I'm talking about. I can set a game time for 9 a.m. I'm a morning person. So I rise at my usual time. I'm one of the first on the scene, coffee in hand. I can enjoy the setup. I know it's going to take me an hour, but I'm going to set all my bits out, get my trays out, get everything organized the way that I want to, and then that 2 to 3, maybe even 4 or 5 hour game gets played. A convention setting works great for that for me, and then I just throw everything in the box and know that I'm going to reorganize it over the next week of my life when I get it back home. I don't have to worry about my kids knocking something off the table. I don't have to worry about, all the other things that can come up. But I think that works really well. Games that take more than an hour to set up and more than 2 hours to play.
No, that's a great point, Michael. And one of the things that you didn't even mention, that's actually my number 4 as well, is long games. And the thing that you didn't mention when you're talking about setup is when you can sign up for a game and somebody else is doing the setup. When I got the Jabron and Michael McCabe setting up the game that takes an hour to set up, and I can stroll in when it's all set up and just play and then leave afterwards because I got to get to something else. It's a huge, huge benefit. And to be able to play some of those longer games when you're at a convention, sometimes, even for us, the idea of taking up a whole game night with a 3-hour game sometimes feels like, I don't know if I really want to do that. But when you're at a convention, games like Mansions of Madness and My Father's Work, and you hear about people playing Twilight Imperium, that's when they do that. They get together and play some of those because they have the time to do that. So great choice there. My number 4 as well, long games.
Awesome. My number 3 is games involving a lot of people. I defined a lot as more than 4. Doug touched on this in his number 5. I don't really have a whole lot to add on other than I don't have 7 people in my life to get together and play a hobby level or even a game like Shadows over Camelot.
Yeah.
Other than at a convention. And that's just, there's a practicality with that. We're in a hobby that's a niche that requires humans, and when you get to more than 4, I have 5 people in my family, but we don't all want to sit down and play some of these types of games. So, yeah.
Or the same game.
Right.
My number 3 is giant versions. So oftentimes you'll go to conventions.
Oh, this is a good one.
Publishers have giant versions of their games. So I've seen a giant version of Suro where people are putting down tiles on the floor. There are no player. You are the player piece, and you place down a tile on the floor, and you walk through on your path, and hopefully you don't fall off the side. I've seen giant Catan. I've seen giant King of Tokyo. There's giant Rhino Hero where people are stacking cards. So every once in a while, you can go to a convention and find some of these really unique experiences based on games. So number 3, check out giant versions if they're available at a con that you go to.
Can't believe this didn't make my list, especially because I'm anxiously awaiting sign up for our local convention to be able to sign up for a giant version of the Guild of Merchant Explorers. So yeah, that's a real thing. Number 2 for the last 2 are very selfish, but that's okay. It's my list. Games off your unplayed shelf. Yes, conventions can be a great way to bring in games that are on my next up or unplayed or shelf of shame or shelf of opportunity, whatever your shelf is called. But I have a stack of games where it's look, I'm not going to force this game group, whether it's family or friends, to have to play this game. I've talked about it enough. I've gone fishing. Nothing's biting. I'm going to take it to a convention. I actually take about a trunk full of those types of games with me.
No, it's a good choice. Mine kind of lines up with that in some ways. But my number 2 is old favorites. Conventions, I think, are a really good chance to play the games that you love that you maybe wish you got to the table more. A lot of conventions have game libraries. And you know what they don't have a lot of? Hotness. They have a lot of the old games, the games that you got into the hobby, that you loved when you got into the hobby. And sometimes being able to play those games and take a break where it's you already know most of the rules, you can get it set up and you can play. It's a great way to kind of relax if you've been playing those longer games, those heavier games, and you're sometimes just to be able to step back and play something that you've loved for a long time and finally get it to the table again. I think is a great opportunity to do that at conventions. So my number 2 is old favorites.
That's awesome. Lots of ways to approach a convention. And, number 2 for me was a selfish one. Number 1 doesn't get more selfish, and that's games no one else in your life will play with you. And I mean that from a place of love. If I've got a game called Hegemony that takes me 3 to 5 hours to play, that's only getting played at a convention. That's not a weekend game. What's that?
Hegemony.
Yeah, that one too. Another game, Dwellings of Eldervale, which is also coming out with Andromeda Strain. Can't wait for that one to finally show up. You know, that's a convention game for me. Yeah, I could play it solo, but if I want to play with other people, I need to get that out, get it to a convention, either run it or throw a flag up saying players wanted. And I have absolutely no shame with saying any of that. I try to keep those games to minimal space on my shelf, but they're games that I love. So similar to what Doug said, but slightly different.
All right. Awesome. My number one was the first thing that went on my list and determined, even when I thought I was going to be doing individual games, I knew that this one was going to be kind of the cheater until I decided that all of mine were going to be that way. And in true game schooler fashion, I think my number one has to be anything new. When we talk about trying before you buying, that whole concept of see if you like the game first before you run out and buy it. Trying out games at conventions can whittle that list down, and you can find games that either maybe you weren't even on your radar or some that you were pretty high on that then you see them on the table or you play a little bit of them, even if it's just a demo, and say, I don't think this one is actually for me. And I'm glad that I tried it before I just picked it up, trying to get free shipping or something like that. So being able to try something before you buy it, anything new that you haven't played, kind of goes with Michael's playing stuff that is on your shelf, or maybe it's on somebody else's shelf that they haven't played. But just trying something new and different games, getting them to the table before you buy, and just kind of helping yourself make a little bit more wise decisions, or certainly more informed decisions. So that was my number one. Anything new. Anything on your honorable mention, Michael?
No, I combined my honorable mention in with my top five. How about you?
Nothing. No, nothing for me either. So solid. When you look at that game list of games or categories of games, just kind of overwhelming, the amount of things that you can do at a convention and the different masters you can serve all in one weekend. Because
we didn't even talk about LARPing or painting or eating or any of that. I mean, there's a lot of that.
But the idea that you could play one game from every one of the categories that we mentioned and have just a really unique experience is cool. So that's going to do it for us this week. We're going to remind you to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on X at GameSchoolerU. Join our Discord, gameschooler.com/Discord. We'd love to have you there. Next week, we're going to be talking about Dwarf Romantic. We have an interview lined up with Stephen Kerr, game designer and graphic designer. And we're going to be taking another stab at Roll and Write games, our version 2 of that. So thank you so much for spending the last hour or so with us. We truly appreciate it.
And thank you to Keith Matejka for being here for an awesome interview. Get out there and keep gaming.